Remove that thing from your neck, Mr. Hunt. Now, Judge Albright's voice was a blade in the quiet courtroom, sharp and confident, expecting immediate obedience. Across the room, at the defendant's table, Norman Hunt sat perfectly still. He was a man etched by time, his back straight, his hands resting calmly in his lap. Around his neck, against the worn fabric of his jacket, lay a simple 5-pointed star hanging from a pale blue ribbon adorned with 13 white stars. His fingers did not twitch. His gaze did not waver. He simply looked at the judge, his pale eyes holding a lifetime of storms the man on the bench could never imagine. The judge, a man whose authority was his entire world, saw the stillness not as dignity, but as defiance. His face, already florid, began to darken. The gavel struck the polished oak of the bench, the sound a sharp crack of impatience that made the young public defender beside Norman flinch. "This is a court of law, Mr. Hunt, not a costume party. I will not have you sitting in my courtroom parading unearned valor. I am giving you one final opportunity to show respect for this institution and remove that cheap replica." The judge's words, amplified by the courtroom microphone, dripped with condescension. He gestured dismissively toward the bailiff, a large man who shifted his weight, his discomfort a silent apology in the tense room. "Bailiff, if the defendant refuses to comply, you will confiscate the item." The bailiff took a hesitant step forward. The public defender, Sarah Jenkins, rose to her feet, her voice barely a whisper. "Your Honor, my client is 86 years old. He is a veteran of the United States Armed Forces. That medal is of immense personal significance does not grant him the right to violate the sanctity of this courtroom, or for that matter federal law." Albright cut her off, his voice booming. He leaned forward, his spectacles slipping down his nose as he peered at Norman. "Are you even aware of the Stolen Valor Act, Mr. Hunt? It is a federal offense to wear, manufacture, or sell any military decoration or medal without authorization. And that medal," he said, pointing a trembling accusatory finger, "is the highest honor our nation can bestow. It is reserved for heroes, for warriors. It is not a prop to be worn to curry sympathy for a traffic violation." The charge was mundane, almost laughable in its simplicity. A rolling stop and an expired vehicle registration. Yet the judge was treating it as a stage for a much grander performance of his own power. He saw an old man, frail and alone, and an opportunity to make an example. He relished the silence of the room, the captive audience, the weight of his own voice filling every corner. "People of your generation," the judge continued, warming to his theme, "sometimes get confused. Memories fade. The desire for recognition, however, can be a powerful thing. Perhaps you served. Perhaps you were even a decent soldier. Many were. But decency does not make you a hero. It does not entitle you to wear something that real men bled and died for. Men who are no longer with us. You dishonor them with this charade." Norman Hunt remained silent. His stillness was an anchor in the turbulent courtroom. It was not the passivity of the weak, but the profound calm of a man who had faced far worse than the angry pronouncements of a petty tyrant. He had faced the screaming chaos of machine gun fire, the suffocating darkness of a collapsed trench, the final fading light in the eyes of friends. The judge's words were mere noise, hollow and meaningless. "So you refuse to speak?" Albright scoffed. "You refuse to comply with a direct order from a superior court judge. Fine. We will add contempt of court to your list of transgressions. That carries a penalty of jail time, Mr. Hunt. Perhaps a night in a cell will remind you of the importance of rules and regulations." He waved the bailiff forward again. "Paul, I will not say it again. Remove that piece of tin from his neck. Use whatever force is necessary." The bailiff, Paul, a veteran himself, approached the table. His eyes met Norman's, and for a fleeting second, he saw not a defiant old man but the quiet strength of his own grandfather. He could smell the cheap polish on the courtroom floor, see the dust motes dancing in the shafts of light from the high windows, and all he could feel was the profound wrongness of the moment. "Sir," he said softly, his voice full of a respect the judge lacked, "please don't make me do this." Norman finally moved. He slowly raised a hand, not to defend himself but to gently touch the metal. His fingers, gnarled with age and arthritis, brushed against the cool metal. The touch was a key, unlocking a door in his mind. The courtroom dissolved. The judge's angry voice faded into a distant roar, replaced by the deafening thunder of artillery. He was no longer on a polished wooden bench, but pressed into the cold, wet mud of a foreign hillside. The air, thick with the smell of gunpowder and blood, was a solid thing in his lungs. He felt the weight of a young soldier, barely a boy, slung over his shoulder, the warm stickiness seeping through his uniform. He saw the glint of the sun off the bayonets of an advancing enemy, a wave of steel and fury. He heard the desperate cries for a medic, the strained metal groan of a tank, the final whispered prayer of a fallen comrade. And then, another image, clearer than the rest. A field tent, the air still hazy with the smoke of battle. A general, his face grim and smudged with dirt, placing this very ribbon around his neck, the weight of it a burden far heavier than its few ounces of metal. "The world needs to know what you did," the general had said, his voice thick with unshed tears. The bailiff's hand gently touched his shoulder, and the vision shattered. Norman was back in the courtroom, the sterile, quiet world of laws and procedures. The bailiff's hand was still on him, his touch hesitant, respectful. "Sir?" he asked again. Norman looked at the man, then at the judge, whose face was now a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. The humiliation was complete. The power dynamic was absolute. Or so it seemed. In the back row of the gallery, a young man in a crisp suit had been watching the entire exchange, his initial disbelief hardening into a cold, focused anger. He was a junior aide to a state congressman, sent to the courthouse to observe a zoning dispute case scheduled for later that afternoon. He did not recognize the old veteran personally, but he recognized the medal. His own grandfather, a career Marine, had a replica in a shadow box in his study. The aide knew its significance. He knew the gravity of what he was witnessing. As the judge delivered his tirade, the aide slipped his phone from his pocket, keeping it low and out of sight. His fingers flew across the screen, searching the county docket for the defendant's name, Norman Hunt. A few more taps brought him to a digitized public records search. He typed the name and a few keywords: Veteran, Medal of Honor. The search results loaded instantly. A cascade of official documents, newspaper articles, and military citations. His eyes widened. It wasn't just a story. It was a legend. He saw grainy black and white photos of a much younger Norman, his face determined and heroic. He read citations detailing acts of courage that seemed to belong in a movie script, not in the life of the quiet old man being berated for a traffic ticket. He read about a lone stand against an overwhelming force, about carrying wounded men across open ground under withering fire, about a selfless bravery that had saved dozens of lives. He felt a surge of adrenaline, a potent mix of fury and purpose. He knew he couldn't stand up and shout. He knew he couldn't interrupt the judge without being thrown out and held in contempt himself, but he could make a phone call. He slipped out of the courtroom as quietly as a shadow, his heart pounding against his ribs. He found an empty corridor, the silence a stark contrast to the tension in the room he'd just left. He scrolled through his contacts, his thumb hovering over a name he rarely used. It was the direct line to his boss's personal cell phone, a number for emergencies only. He pressed the button. "This had better be important, son." The congressman's gruff voice answered. "It is, sir," the aide said, his voice low and urgent. "You will not believe what is happening in Judge Albright's courtroom. He's about to have a man arrested for contempt, an old veteran named Norman Hunt." He paused, taking a breath. "Sir, the judge is trying to confiscate his Medal of Honor." The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. When the congressman spoke again, his voice was transformed, stripped of its political smoothness and replaced with the hard, cold authority of a man who had once commanded troops himself. "Say that name again." "Norman Hunt, sir." The congressman let out a sharp, incredulous breath. "Get me the number for the courthouse administrative office, and the direct line to the state's senior military liaison. Now." The call ended. The aide knew a storm was coming. The cavalry had been summoned. Inside the courthouse, phones began to ring. The first call was to the court clerk, a quiet, efficient woman who sat just below the judge's bench. Her eyes widened as she listened to the clipped, authoritative voice on the other end of the line. She scribbled a note on a piece of paper, her hand trembling slightly. The second call went to the office of the presiding judge of the Superior Court, 2 floors above. The secretary took the call, her face paling as she recognized the caller's identity. She interrupted a meeting, whispering urgently into her boss's ear. The presiding judge stood up so quickly his chair nearly toppled over. A third call, routed through the governor's office, reached the cell phone of a man sitting in his car in a nearby parking lot, reading a briefing on his tablet. He was a major general, the commander of the nearby military base. He listened for less than 30 seconds before he spoke. "I'm on my way." He started the car, his movements precise and economical. He keyed his radio. "I need an honor guard detail at the county courthouse. Priority 1, full dress uniform." Now, back in the courtroom, Judge Albright was oblivious to the frantic activity his actions had set in motion. He was lost in the apex of his power trip, savoring the moment before the final, crushing blow of his authority. He had pushed Norman Hunt past the point of redemption in his mind. The old man's silence was an admission of guilt, his dignity a pathetic act of defiance. "Bailiff, I am issuing a final order," Albright declared, his voice ringing with self-importance. "You will remove the defendant's illegal decoration. You will then take him into custody. He will be held for a 72-hour psychiatric evaluation. Clearly, a man who engages in such public fantasies is a danger to himself and others. He has no place in society until he has been properly assessed." This was the final overreach, the step from arrogance into pure cruelty. The public defender gasped, a small, horrified sound. The crowd in the gallery murmured, their discomfort finally coalescing into a palpable sense of outrage. The bailiff, Paul, stood frozen, caught between the judge's tyrannical order and his own conscience. He looked at Norman, whose calm expression had not changed, and he felt a profound sense of shame. He took another step, his hand outstretched, not to grab but to plead. "Sir, please," he whispered. "Just take it off, we can sort this out later." And then the sound began. It was distant at first, a faint, rhythmic chopping that grew steadily louder. It was the unmistakable sound of helicopters. More than one, and they were getting closer. Fast. Then another sound joined the first, the rising symphony of sirens, not the familiar pattern of a single patrol car, but a chorus of them converging on this one spot. Heads in the courtroom turned towards the windows. The judge, annoyed by the interruption, banged his gavel. "Order! What is the meaning of this?" But no one was listening to him anymore. Through the tall arched windows they could see them, two sleek black military helicopters, the kind usually reserved for dignitaries and special operations, were descending, their rotors whipping the trees in the courthouse square into a frenzy. Below, a fleet of black SUVs and state police cruisers screamed to a halt, their lights painting the street in flashes of red and blue. Doors flew open, and uniformed personnel began to disembark. They moved with a disciplined urgency that made the courthouse security guards look like statues. The heavy doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Two uniformed state troopers